SSQ stands for story, situation, and question. It's a method of literary analysis first developed by author and writing teacher Vivian Gornick, but it's also an extremely helpful technique in learning to ask the types of questions that make great research questions. During the next few weeks, we're going to apply the SSQ method to some different texts, particularly the ones that you all have written as your introductions, but I think we can start with a piece that you may already be familiar with. Maybe. We're going to listen to the first verse of Ice-T's 1986, classic, I was like, that sounds wrong, 6 in the morning. And then we're going to perform an SSQ analysis of it. So you can see the lyrics right there, and I'm going to play it for you, just the first verse, and then we can talk about it.
6 in the morning, police at my door. Fresh Adidas squeak across the bathroom floor. Out my back window, I take my escape. Didn't even get a chance to grab my old school tape. Mad with no music, but happy cause free. And the streets to a player is the place to be. Got a knot in my pocket weighing at least $1,000. Gold on my neck, my pistol's close in hand. I'm a self-made monster of the city streets. Remotely controlled by hard hip-hop beats. But just living in the city is a serious task. Didn't know what the cops wanted, didn't have time to ask.
Okay, so again, 6 in the morning, police at my door, fresh Adidas squeak across the bathroom floor. Out my back window, I make my escape, didn't even get a chance to grab my old school tape. Mad with no music, but happy cause free, and the streets to a player is the place to be. Got a knot in my pocket, weighing at least $1,000, gold on my neck, my pistol's close at hand. I'm a self-made monster of the city streets, remotely controlled by hard hip-hop beats, but just living in the city is a serious task. Don't know what the cops wanted, didn't have time to ask. All right, so again, this is the first verse of Ice-T's 6 in the morning. So the story here, if we were to sort of break it down, right, into like what's happening in this first verse, the story here would be something like the police bust into a young man's house as he's sleeping, but he escapes through a back window and hits the streets where he feels at home. All right, so that's, again, just kind of what's happening, right? What's happening in that verse. The situation, though, is the larger social issue that the story speaks to. So what's the problem? What's the conflict? Like, what is the story about, right? So here we know that the police are busting in at 6 o'clock in the morning while the family is sleeping. So maybe the situation, what this piece is actually about, is no-knock warrants, right? The implications of no-knock warrants. Could be, however, or at the same time, the situation that we're looking at are like police community relations in South Central Los Angeles during this period of time. So questions, right? Now we're on to the Q. The first S, again, is the story. The second S is the situation, or sort of the larger context, the social context that the story is speaking to. And then finally, what kinds of questions that might make good research questions can we ask about the situation? So we're not asking our questions about the story, right? We're asking our questions about the situation. So some questions might be like, how has policing in communities of color like South Central Los Angeles changed since Ice-T wrote this song in the mid-1980s? And that's something that you could research. That's something that you could find out an answer to, that you would write about in an inquiry-based research paper. You might also ask a question like, how successful have no-knock warrants been in communities like South Central Los Angeles, and what have been some side effects of that policing practice over the years? So here, and we'll talk about this more as we talk about great research questions, but you want to be pretty specific, you see, in these questions that you're asking about the situation, right? So we're talking about specific communities, we're talking about specific time frames, right? Or in the second one, we're talking about, sort of investigating the way that a practice has changed over time. So again, S, story, what's happening in general in the piece that you're reading or in the piece that you wrote. What is the situation? What is the larger conflict or issue or problem or, again, social situation that the story speaks to? And then finally, how can you ask some questions that might turn into research questions about the situation? All right, so here's another one. This is a short piece by a student, a John Jay student named Rose. We're going to listen to it together. This is a podcast that John Jay students put together called Life Out Loud, and this is actually one of the first episodes of the podcast. Again, this is Rose, and the piece is called Thoughts in Transit. So we're going to listen to Rose, and then we'll do an SSQ.
A man sitting next to me smells like grass and cigarettes. He's a small man, but his hands are so big and worn out, like the machinery that they treat him as, rusty, but working to the point of malfunction, just like the relationship between me and my father, which is exactly what the man on the 2 train looks like. A little Mexican man with dark hair and baggy eyes, torn jeans and dirty work boots, just like my father, with a black JanSport book bag that smells like the company that exploits him, like grass and cigarettes, or like the fish market, where my father knows is the death of him. He made a vow to his children that he cannot live for himself because he is too old to dream, too Mexican to be citizen, and far too stubborn to give me and 2 other siblings anything but love. Just like the man on the 2 train, who probably has children to feed, where he works less than minimum wage jobs to make limited food on the table, just like my father, far too old for the physical work he's given, but too motivated to stop, hoping that his children will learn the vocabulary he doesn't know, the language he rarely spoke. Just like the man on the 2 train, with the gray mustache and the foreign name, who was falling asleep next to me on the 2 train. And he nods off and drifts away to the place where his parents once lived and where he once called home. Next stop is 72nd Street, only to wake up and realize that he'll never be young, and even if he were, he would not be back in Puebla. He'd work his way only to end up in the same place he's in today, just like my father, and I wonder how he doesn't go insane, because I can't travel without the iPod my father bled for, because I wouldn't dare leave myself with my own thoughts, just like the man with the baggy eyes, ripped jeans, and dirty work boots, just like the man on the 2 train. I cry because I look into his blank eyes and I don't know what he's thinking. Just like my father, who looks like the cracks on my palms, so close and always loving, but to the world he's so small and crooked across my skin, and so unnoticed, just like the man on the 2 train.
Okay, so the story could be, we could kind of analyze that story to be, Rose rides the 2 train next to a man who reminds her of her father. She contemplates all the sacrifices he made for her and her family. So that would be, again, sort of the major narrative drive in that short piece. From the story, the situations that might arise for us out of it could be things like immigration or exploitative labor conditions, or from Rose's perspective, sort of first generation American problems or issues, or that kind of generation gap that is exacerbated by cultural differences, right? To a parent and a child growing up in really different cultural and social environments. So then some questions, research questions that might come out of this would be things like, what unique pressures do the children of recent immigrants to the United States face? Or something like, how do people's work experiences change after they immigrate to the United States? And both of these are the types of questions that you could pursue in a research paper and write about throughout the semester. So thank you for listening to this video about the screencast, I guess, about the SSQ method. Again, the S is the story itself. The second S is the situation, the cultural context, the problems, what the story is about. And then finally, the Q is like, what kind of a research question, an inquiry-based research question might you be able to ask about the story and about the situation, actually. All right. Thank you for listening. Take care.